Welcome to the inaugural issue of Fly Smack with Gordon Vanderpool and myself, Stephen Big T Tomasovich. We have talked about doing this for, about 5 years?
Easy 5 years.
And so we're finally doing it. We don't have a script. We don't have anything written down. We don't have anything planned, but we're together for the first time in a long time. So I figured we'd at least give it a shot, and maybe we can edit it out enough to make it
presentable.
I was thinking about something the other day because, well, I was throwing, first of all, a lot of the guys that have been coming in here have been buying unweighted nymphs that have really all year.
Right.
Typically in my mindset, I'm fishing, especially if I'm Euro nymphing, I'm fishing weighted flies. And sometimes the bead and the action with a bead and weight built into your fly can be the detriment. Sometimes it's what you need. So the whole idea of weight popped into my brain. And so I figured I'd pick Gordon's brain on some of his thoughts as well. Gordon is owner of Turning Stones Fly Fishing. It's a guide service in Western North Carolina. Also is the Southeastern coach for the Youth USA fly fishing team. Myself, I own Sequoia River Outfitters here in Clarksville, Georgia. And so we run a little guide service too. And so between us, he's got more experience. I'm bigger than he is though. So
That's just the way you're sitting on the camera.
I sat in the chair a little bit higher.
See how I'm slunched over?
Because it'll affect him.
I told him I'd give it to him today.
It'll affect him this entire. He literally asked me if there were any like phone books or anything.
Honestly, though, this looks bad.
It's great.
This looks way worse than it is.
Yeah, but if you had a fish,
if I sit like that,
if you were holding the fish, it would look big. Mine would look like an 8-inch stocker, regardless.
Our hands are
about the same.
Yours are a little meatier than mine, but my fingers are longer. Look, y'all saw it.
A little fatter.
My paws are longer.
So on the weight issue, I think the number one, we're fishing so many beats today, it's possible that in heavily pressured areas, you might find some fish getting bead shy. And
Totally.
Just the natural movement that exists with unweighted flies can be a little bit better. Can you describe the several different ways that you'll apply weight, either for just the average angler, where you would play split shot, where you would, let's start with split shot.
Like on a bobber rig or something?
Yeah, I like to call it suspension.
Suspension, yeah, that works.
I think George termed that.
Yeah, George does. He says suspension.
Suspension nymphing sounds a lot better than bobber.
It does make it sound better and make sense. The way I kind of learned years ago was what really got me as a comfortable bobber fishing years ago was in California. My buddy Mark Rosen and Gary Gunsley out there were the ones that really kind of dialed me in on it. And the way, if I remember right, they would have their bobber indicator, and they would always make sure that all your line under the bobber was the size tippet you were going to fish.
Right.
Which is important.
We preach that a lot.
Yeah, because you see a lot of people come, they get a 9-foot tapered leader, and then their indicator is slid up 4 feet on it, and they ruin the leader. So they always taught me to never compromise the leader.
Okay, now tell me why that's a problem.
Because it's going to put kinks into that. Plus, the line below the bobber is going to be too thick, and it's not going to sink right.
Right.
So it's going to be
now. When you say sink right, what do you mean?
It's not going to sink fast.
You also are going to have
a big belly.
You're going to have a belly in that, and so whereas normally with just a single diameter tippet, you might be riding like this in the water column suspension nymphing.
Yeah.
You're going to be with
disconnect.
What's that called? Curvature. You're going to have curvature. And that curvature can create slack, and it also misleads you into thinking you're at a certain depth when you've got a lot of that distance tied up in the curve and the arc there. So
so I would come off, same tippet all the way down to my first fly, and this is kind of the way I do it. And there's a lot of different ways you can nymph fish under a bobber, right? But I would put typically my bigger fly first. That'd be the first one I would tie on before I ever learned like the Euro tag system stuff. I would tie that thing on through the eye, and then I would drop, 20, 22 inches off of that. Sometimes lighter tippet, just in case you break off, you at least get one fly back. But 20, 22 inches roughly. Then I would put either a smaller fly, like maybe a midge, or after the days of squirmy worms, I would trail an unweighted squirmy worm right there and have the heavy fly first. And then I would get my lead and put it probably 6, 7 inches above the fly towards the indicator. And I would put one little one on to start, the little tiny BBs, and see what that gave me. And if it wasn't enough, I'd add another one. And I always put like a finger width gap in between each split chop.
Okay.
And what that does, the way it sinks uniform, and it is less likely to have a big bulk of weights in one spot to snag under rocks and stuff. And it flows better over stuff. And then I would just add another one.
So your indicator split, first fly predominantly big in that rig.
Bigger, and that may be a size 20.
And
just
then,
depends.
Right, yeah. And then an unweighted.
Yeah,
okay.
And then unweighted. And that was, back when they kind of showed me that style and how they did it and how effective it was, that was like fishing on the East Walker River in California and Nevada.
Right.
Which is, pretty technical in places. At least for me back then, having kind of get it dialed in.
So I started a lot later than Gordon. And I think we all go through a maturation process as anglers. At least I did. And I was mature. I was the newbie. I was learning everything. And then I was that teenager and thought I knew everything. I was the know-it-all. And so since I kind of started more in the tungsten bead era, I kind of frowned upon split shot, and I called the rig you're talking about the 60-year-old TU rig, because it seemed like all the guys that I guided, no offense to you 60-year-olds that are in Trout Unlimited, but all the guys that I guided had that rig, and I was like, I bet you catch a lot on the swing. It's the only time you're connected.
Yeah.
And things like that. And, of course, I've matured and realized there's a lot more ways to skin the cat than necessarily what I'm doing.
Yeah.
And I think a lot of us speak when we speak and look at things, it's based on our own experiences. So what we do here in the Southeast or on this particular river, you might frown down upon a technique like that, whereas that's really the best way to fish somewhere else. And it's the best way to fish in the river you fish it sometimes. You just haven't realized that yet.
Yeah.
So
things are definitely location dependent.
So what's the positive of that setup?
What, fishing that rig like that? Yeah. What I know has been a positive for me, and I've seen it come to play, like a lot of the guide trips I do are like on rivers like the Tuckasegee. It's a pile of fish, but it also gets a pile of fishermen. It gets tons of pressure.
Right.
So, like, everybody sees the squirmies, the mobs, the eggs.
Right.
All those fish see that. And they get shy to it right away. So they go to natural pretty quick. So, somebody's rolling in. Hey, that's the guy you were always telling me about there. I recognize him. That's another squatch.
That's the fellow squatch.
Look at him back there. There he is. So
we've got a third squatch in the house.
Yeah, and I will officially be the smallest out of everybody here, and that's just amazing. Just makes me want to quit and go home, No.
You've got the biggest truck.
Yeah. I make up for it with the truck. It's my small squatch complex. But so where that comes into play for me that I've noticed, I've been out on guide trips, with clients, and they're like, maybe fished it a couple of days, and they're like, they won't eat squirm. But I would throw that natural, like a waltz or something down there, trail the unweighted squirm, and they would smash it. And they're like, why are they eating that based upon the beaded squirm?
Right.
I'm like, because the beaded squirm is dead in one zone wherever you're keeping it. This unweighted squirm is just going all through the column, and they grab it with confidence, and they hold on to it.
Right.
And I've found that happen so many times.
Have you fished a drop shot style rig with an indicator? Do you like that? I've never done it. It's not something I've done.
I do like it. And I'm going to tell you where I started doing it.
And describe that real quick.
Yeah. I don't know if I'm doing it right, but this is kind of the way I adopted it, right? And the river that I did it the most on was the Tuck.
Okay.
Because I'm going to tell you what it was. I was on a guide trip one day. We were catching them. And but I saw another buddy guide, and his name's Mark Hipp. He used to work for Brookings. And this was before I really knew Mark too well. But he was with his clients fishing a run that I fish, and they were beating their face in. And I was like, so immediately my wheels they're turning. I'm like, why is he railing on me?
That's eating you alive.
Yeah, so I'm trying to think. Well, I knew Mark was really good at his craft, but I was like, okay, what's he doing? So in my head, I'm like, well, I've been playing around with this drop shot. Let me just go all smalls, like 18s, 20s, 22s, and do the drop shot. So what I'd do, I'd tie on one, and I would leave him on a tag up high. Then put the point on 20 inches below. They may be size 20, size 18, right? And then below that point, I could keep him on a tag. But if I attached into that, I would make sure if I was fishing 7X for those two, that I would put 8X below that. And then I would trail it maybe however far I wanted that bottom fly to be off the water, off the bottom, like that. And I would put a couple knots in the bottom and just drop split shot down on it.
Now, that had to be years ago because there's no way you're tying on 8X now.
That was a while ago. But I'm going to tell you what, just going smalls, you know, like midges and stuff, which I like to fish.
Right.
But keeping them uber connected with a drop shot, it was effective. You know what I mean?
Other than hang-ups, what's the difference between doing that, though, and fishing a weighted fly on your bottom? Well, is there one, or is that the predominant advantage of the drop shot? Is the like a hang-up?
You still get some hang-ups because your weight's going to hang up.
Yeah.
But I think the way they do it is by having that smaller tippet there that you keep your flies.
Right.
When you get hung up, you snap it off. You just lose your weights in that.
Yeah, makes sense.
But I think what it does, and especially in Euro, like I think Kelly Gallup likes to do that a lot. I get the feeling, I think I've heard his name thrown around in that ring.
I imagine if they're feeding mid to upper water column, that's really effective too, because you can still get your weight down closer to the bottom, but have your flies suspended.
I can keep my connection
and keep the connection,
you know, or even close. You know, I'm not doesn't always have to be tight, obviously. Right. You know,
right.
So I think there's a lot of advantages to doing that kind of stuff.
Yeah,
you know.
When you get back into the Euro style and doing connection style nymphing, typically, I mean, I guess it originated with something super heavy on the bottom. But I know we've lightened things up tremendously. The micro leaders become extremely popular, lighter flies. Do you frequently fish a heavier fly on your tag versus the point?
I mean, point is definitely where my larger, heavier fly goes 99% of the time.
Okay.
Years ago, it was 50-50. Like when I was first 3 to 5 years I was learning, I did both. And they both actually, I mean, I found tons of success putting bigger flies on droppers and then leaving that unweighted smaller fly.
Right.
Because it goes back to what I was talking about with the indicator. I'm like, it's literally the same thing.
Right.
You know, I have my natural here and my squirm there. It's the same thing. And I fished it that way. You know, in Cherokee back when that used to fish well with all those big fish and caught a pile of fish. But here in the last 6, 7, 8 years, I just kind of faded away from it. Doesn't mean I won't do it.
Right.
But it's just
I noticed the other day fishing with Jacob, he was throwing an unweighted pine squirrel zonker. Mm-hmm. Something you almost always would have weight on. But the difference between the way they ate that, trailing a heavier fly, I mean, it just was night and day. Yeah. Versus fishing a weighted pine squirrel. So I even adopted that further, and I threw it as a single. Just a single zonker, totally unweighted, and it would just barely break the meniscus.
Yeah, just flutter out there.
Which is a word I learned from Gordon. I hope I'm using it right because I don't know that I trust.
He doesn't trust me.
You with vocabulary.
Well, I was telling him about the egg emerger pattern that I developed years ago.
6 feet under the meniscus.
Yeah, it's that egg emerger
in the meniscus,
right in the meniscus, 6.5 to 7 feet.
That's a soft tackle.
Onto the bottom of the soft tackle. Yeah.
Yeah, soft tackle, egg emerger, flashback.
Deadly on the hooch.
Deadly.
You saw it. I mean,
but I was throwing that unweighted, and it was interesting to watch the extremely slow pool, and that's another place unweighted stuff is really effective. They notice when you throw something, especially pressured fish, it starts going down. Like bugs don't do that. Bugs don't sink extremely fast.
And you know what the fish do at that point? They're like, oh, and they stop. They ain't following that
watch
thing
them chase, and nah, not for me.
They don't like to eat down.
I actually threw that zonker, and I don't know if they were thinking it was a damselfly. No.
Yeah, it's hard to say.
Or something like that. They didn't. They ate it more like a dry fly. As it would come to the surface, they'd come up and hammer that thing.
Yeah.
Which was fun because it was like we don't get a whole lot of dry fly action here, so it was like getting to sea strikes.
Yeah.
As if it was a dry fly. But the beauty of it was a bigger fly and a bigger hook.
Yeah.
Have to fight the smaller stuff that we tend to fight when we're fishing dry flies here, at least. So,
but what does that come down to? It comes back down to sink rate.
Sink rate.
Like, you know, it looks like maybe a crippled minnow, right? But it's like, how long can I keep that fly in the zone that they're more comfortable to feed in for that time?
Which brings me to another interesting time that we were doing a competition, and it was Ben Vandebender, I believe, that I saw do it. I know other people have done it, but fishing a dry fly behind a weighted fly.
Yeah.
And letting that swing and emerge really come up and emerge like an insect, and did well with it on that particular day.
Never played with it, but up Cherokee back when that was dynamite. I was guiding at School Bridge.
Right.
And there was always this one guy, I forget his name. I don't know if it was, you remember old Rocket Roy?
Yeah.
It might have been him. Didn't he have a beard?
I think so.
It might have been him, but he was fishing a sunken dry fly there and hurting on some fish under a bobber.
Yeah.
That's the first time I'd ever seen it. Never played with it, but
I fished a sunken one day at Settles Bridge, which is below the dam. The next on Chattahoochee River, there were a rare occasion where there was actually a hatch, but a black stonefly hatch going off, and they would not eat that thing up top. And it's one of those you just coincidentally run into it. You're maybe decide to walk upstream, and it drags and swings, and you get hammered. And you're like, oh, that was interesting. I'll let it swing next time. And as soon as it goes under, they start
smoking it again.
So,
I mean, I've had it happen with dry dropper.
Yeah.
You know, you're fishing a dry dropper, and then it just gets saturated, sinks, and then you get smoked.
So, you know, adjust your weights for the depth you're using. Change your weight position at certain times to take advantage of things like sink rate.
Yeah.
Unweighted flies are going to move more naturally in the current. If it's a technical bite, you may want to consider running an unweighted fly behind your weight to allow it to bounce. Now, the downside to that is you can have disconnect. You can have situations where even on the entry of your rig, because it's unweighted, it's more susceptible to current flows. So it hits and it moves downstream real quick on occasion. And it may take a bit for your rig to get back in the right situation where your weight's in front of your fly trailing it, things like that. So, and I think that might be one of the reasons the indicator rig is the suspension nymphing's a more popular way to fish that setup.
Yeah. Because
you've got more distance on your drift typically for everything to kind of get adjusted in the right spots. So.
Yeah, with tight lining, I mean, 35, 40 footer, you know, for the more distance guys, and you got to get control quick.
And if you guys want to learn more about weight, I mean, the two of us certainly are pretty much experts in that arena.
I mean,
if I showed you what was on camera prior to us filming,
you'd be impressed.
You'd be impressed. So we appreciate you guys tuning in. I'd say we're going to do a lot more of these, but I can't guarantee that based on our history. But
look, we will.
Every so many years we get together, we'll put one of these together.
You know what, though? We're not every month or so. I've been trying to slide down here.
That's true. That's true.
He just surprised me today. I'm like, where'd you get these nice little microphones? You're like, oh, I'm getting ready to film the first episode of Fly Smack. And I'm like, oh, yeah? And in my head, I'm like, who? And then I realized he was talking about us.
I think I've still got the logo that we had made up like 4 years ago. So that might be part of this video.
Oh, yeah. You got to throw that logo. And it is pretty slick. So, let us know if you want to see any changes to it because we're not finalized on it yet.
And if you have any recommendations on topics for us to discuss, we welcome them.
Anything.
Thanks for watching.